I did touch on this one when I did my videos ranking every 2026 YouTuber movie, but since it's finally released to the public, I can go more in depth. I can't even tell you how grateful I am that I avoided all the leaks about this, and even more how nobody spoiled this in my comment section, thanks to you guys too. So let's get into it. Once again, I just want to commend the voice actors for doing such an amazing job bringing the feels for every character. After 3 years of watching this show, the emotional payoff was worth it. We finally get to see Jax's backstory and his relationship with Ribbit and Kaufmo and his inevitable abstraction. I knew it was going to happen. The previous episodes have been building up to it, and I honestly don't mind that it happened off screen. We've never seen any on-screen abstraction happen, because it is something that happens when a character is isolated and alone, with no one around to bring them back. We see why he became the Jax we know in the show during these flashbacks, and I think that was well done. We also get my boy's funniest line.
Oh boy, why does that matter? Gay.
Him and Pomni's scene where he finally opens up is probably one of the most emotional scenes in the series. Kane's character arc in this was also great, and I'm super glad I avoided spoilers for this, because I was surprised to actually see him back. Him coming to the realization of just how badly he messed up. He separates himself from the blue dot, because if he wants to move forward with the group, he has to let go of his other self, as it's become toxic and envious of the players, provoking Kane, and making him lose control and getting angry. Kane returns to the circus, and he learns that despite what he thinks, he has created something that has free will, as the moon tells him she loves him, and him knowing he didn't program her to say such a thing. He makes up with the group, showing them what their current lives look like on the outside. We end with a shot very reminiscent of the ending of the pilot, with everyone at the dinner table, except this time, Pomni isn't looking worried and confused, but now being happy and content with everything. I doubt this ending is what people wanted when the show began, but it's also not what I think people probably predicted it would be like. I think this show is a great showcase for indie animation shows. I mean, it's the first one to ever get a theatrical release, so that alone, to me, is a W. I think why we gravitate so much to indie shows is that we seek originality. Now, I don't think that what we've gotten from big companies lately are just all terrible. It's just the lack of something new is the problem lately. I think this show was amazing, and I'd like to thank Gooseworks and Glitch for giving us such a good show. That's enough glazing from me. What was your favorite episode from the series, and who was your favorite character? And as always, thanks for watching. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe.
Not bad, not bad.
It took 39 years, but we finally got another Masters of the Universe live-action movie. And the movie does a good job at building the magical land that is Eternia, and setting up the plot fairly quickly. It was a good introduction into the world of Masters of the Universe. When we meet our hero, he's down on his luck, just wanting to get back home, and you genuinely feel that. Nicholas Galitzine fits as a perfectly solid He-Man casting. The movie does, however, lean a bit too much into the humor, and in this case, some of the jokes were funny and some weren't, especially during some serious tension-building moments in the film, and that does take you out of it a little. The definite standout, just like in the 1987 movie, is Skeletor. Jared Leto commits fully into the campiness and cheesiness of the character, and honestly, he's the most fun character to watch when he's on screen. Some characters were definitely done justice, and some weren't. The fight scenes, especially the ones between He-Man and Skeletor, were very well done, and all in all, I enjoyed this one. It wasn't perfect, but I definitely had a fun time.
Good job.
Scary Movie 6, or Scary Movie 2026, finally has the Wayans brothers returning to the franchise. This movie is basically a parody of the modern-day legacy sequels we have gotten so many of lately, with the Ghostface killer from the first movie returning to target the children of our returning legacy characters. It has some good performances, and they definitely went after everybody, like they've been advertising that no one is safe. They make fun of everybody. But with that, some jokes were funny, and some not really so much. But I had a good time, and if you're easily offended, rather not go watch this, because you will be offended by some of the jokes. I think this movie is alright. The biggest strength by far is the performances. Both Nick Jonas and Paul Rudd do a good job, and their chemistry is what keeps the movie moving whenever the story starts losing steam. There are a couple of genuinely good moments throughout, and some of the music works surprisingly well. The problem is that the movie never really reaches the emotional highs it's aiming for. You can see exactly where certain scenes are supposed to hit hard, but they don't always land the way they should. A lot of the story beats feel familiar, and if you've watched enough music dramas, you'll probably see most of the major plot developments coming from a mile away. That doesn't make it a bad movie by any means. It's perfectly watchable, and there were definitely parts that I enjoyed. I just never found myself completely invested in what was happening on screen. By the time the credits rolled, I thought it was decent enough, but it's probably not one I'm going to be rushing back to anytime soon.
That just makes no fucking sense. I mean, it's just bullshit. Fuck. Oh.
I'm gonna be honest, this one just didn't do much for me at all. The entire movie feels like it's running on autopilot. You've seen this story 100 times before, and unfortunately, office romance doesn't really bring anything new to the table. From the moment the two main characters meet, you can pretty much predict every major plot point that's going to happen. The biggest problem is that I never really bought into the relationship. The chemistry between the leads feels forced at times, and because of that, a lot of the emotional moments just fall flat. The jokes don't land very often, the supporting characters are forgettable, and the story just drags on far longer than it needed to. What's frustrating is that there are a couple of moments where it feels like the movie might actually do something interesting, but every time it gets close, it immediately falls back into the safest and most predictable option possible.
That is one big pile of shit.
This movie was rough, and I mean really rough. There are bad movies that you can at least laugh at, and then there are movies like this, where you're mostly just sitting there wondering how nobody stepped in and realized things weren't working. The story is a complete mess. The characters are painfully underdeveloped, and by the halfway point, I had completely checked out of what was happening. The biggest issue is that the movie gives you absolutely no reason to care. The characters aren't interesting. The dialogue feels unnatural, and every time it looks like the movie might finally do something worthwhile, it immediately fumbles the opportunity. Nothing feels earned, nothing feels memorable, and by the end, it all just blends together into one forgettable experience. Even the performances feel like they're fighting an uphill battle against the script. You can tell some people are trying, but there's only so much you can do when the material you're working with isn't good. The pacing is all over the place. The storytelling is weak, and the whole thing feels like it needed another few drafts before cameras ever started rolling.
I mean, it's alright,
I thought this one was decent. It's got a solid premise, and for the most part, it keeps you interested, just trying to figure out what's really going on. There's a nice sense of mystery at the start, and the setting does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of atmosphere. You're constantly waiting for that moment where everything clicks and the real story is revealed. The issue is, it doesn't fully stick the landing for me. Some of the twists are fine, but others feel a bit predictable. And once the big reveals start coming in, it loses a bit of that tension it built up earlier. The characters are okay, but not really strong enough to carry the movie on their own. So when the mystery dips, the film starts to feel a bit flat. That being said, it's still an easy watch. It's not frustrating or badly made. It just doesn't quite reach the level it feels like it's aiming for. There's enough here to keep you entertained for the runtime, even if it doesn't fully leave a lasting impression after.
That's good. That's damn good.
This was a really pleasant surprise for me. Going into it, I wasn't expecting anything groundbreaking, but the movie ended up delivering exactly what I wanted from it. The action scenes are where this thing shines. They're brutal, fast-paced, and actually feel like there's some weight behind every punch and kick. You can tell a lot of effort went into making the fights feel impactful, instead of just throwing a bunch of quick cuts on screen. The lead actor also does a great job carrying the movie. He has the kind of presence where, even during the quieter scenes, you're still invested in what's happening. The supporting cast all do their jobs well, and the movie keeps things moving at a good pace without getting bogged down in unnecessary side plots. Now, it's not perfect. There are definitely a few story beats you've seen before if you've watched enough action movies, and some of the twists are fairly easy to predict. But honestly, when the action is this entertaining, I can forgive a lot of that. This is one of those movies where I sat down hoping for a fun time and ended up getting something better than expected. It delivers on the action, has a solid cast, and keeps you engaged from start to finish. Josh O'Connor plays a young cybersecurity expert who steals a bunch of thumb drives that prove there is life beyond our planet, and they might already be living amongst us. He then meets Emily Blunt's character, a Kansas City TV meteorologist, who, while live on air, starts having something happen to her, and now the government is after the both of them. The action in this movie is pretty solid. I'll say the standout performances were Colin Firth playing the government baddie, and Coleman Domingo is great as well. But Emily Blunt, man, she is just an amazing actress. She steals every scene she's in. We also have John Williams back on the score for a very good soundtrack. Now, for what I didn't like about the movie. Some of the CGI could have definitely been done better. I mean, this is a Spielberg movie. Come on. And while the story is engaging, it does come off as bland at times. Also, if you're looking for an all-out alien movie where you get all the info, you might be a little disappointed, because you do leave the theater with more questions than answers. So all in all, Disclosure Day was a good movie. Not a great movie, but just a good one.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
This one was a struggle for me. The premise itself isn't bad, and there are a couple of moments early on where it feels like the movie might actually be building towards something interesting. The problem is that it never really gets there. Instead, it spends most of its runtime going around in circles and dragging out reveals that aren't nearly as shocking as the movie thinks they are. The biggest issue is that I just didn't care about most of the characters. The movie keeps asking you to get invested in their stories and motivations, but there isn't enough development for any of them to leave much of an impression. By the time the twists start happening, I was more interested in how much runtime was left than what the actual answers were. The pacing doesn't help either. For a mystery thriller, there are surprisingly long stretches where it feels like nothing is happening. Then, when the movie finally starts giving you answers, they're either predictable or not interesting enough to justify the wait. I wouldn't call it one of the worst movies I've ever seen, because there are a few decent ideas buried in here somewhere, but the execution just isn't there. A forgettable story, weak characters, and a mystery that never really hooks you. The story follows a marine biologist who begins investigating a series of strange incidents happening around a small coastal community. At first, nobody really knows what's going on. There are mysterious disappearances, damaged boats, and growing fears that something dangerous is lurking beneath the water. As the investigation continues, it becomes clear that an ancient creature from Norse legend may actually be real. And now, it's up to a small group of people to figure out how to stop it before more lives are lost. Now, if I'm being honest, guys, I actually had a really good time with this one. I'm a sucker for creature features and monster movies, and Kraken delivered exactly what I wanted. The movie does a good job building up the mystery before eventually giving us the creature, and when the Kraken does show up, it doesn't disappoint. Some of the shots of this thing were genuinely awesome, and the filmmakers did a good job making it feel massive and threatening. I also appreciated that they didn't just rely on the monster to carry the entire movie. The characters were actually pretty decent, and I found myself invested in what was going on. The atmosphere was probably one of the strongest parts of the movie as well. The Norwegian coastline and fjords give the movie a unique look and help create this feeling that something ancient and terrifying is hiding beneath the surface. Is it the greatest monster movie ever made? No, but it doesn't need to be. It's a fun creature feature with some good suspense, solid action, and a monster that actually feels like a threat. If you're a fan of movies like Jaws, Deep Rising, or just giant sea monsters causing chaos, then this is definitely one I'd recommend checking out.
To be honest,
This one sits right in the middle for me. I actually like the idea behind it a lot more than the final product. Taking Robin Hood and telling a darker, more mature story about the end of his life is a genuinely interesting concept. It's something we don't really see very often with these classic characters. The performances are probably the strongest part of the movie. The cast does a solid job with the material they're given, and there are a few scenes that have the emotional weight the movie is aiming for. You can tell it wants to be more of a character study than a traditional action-adventure film. The problem is that the movie never fully commits to being either one. It isn't exciting enough to work as a Robin Hood adventure, and it isn't emotionally engaging enough to work as a great character drama. It kind of gets stuck somewhere in the middle. There are moments where it feels like it's building towards something powerful, but then it never quite reaches that level. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. It's one of those movies where I can appreciate what they were trying to do, even if the execution didn't completely land for me. There are some good ideas here, some decent performances, and a few memorable moments, but overall it just ends up being an average watch.
Not bad.
Not bad, but not good.
Yeah.
I thought this one was decent enough. The biggest thing working in its favor is the chemistry between the two leads. If that didn't work, the whole movie would have fallen apart pretty quickly. But thankfully, both actresses do a solid job, and make the relationship believable enough to keep you invested. The problem is that the story itself feels pretty familiar. If you've watched enough coming-of-age dramas or romance movies, there's a good chance you'll see most of the major story beats coming from a mile away. The movie doesn't really do anything wrong, but it also doesn't do much that stands out from others in the genre. There are definitely some heartfelt moments throughout, and a few scenes that handle the emotional side of the story well. I just found myself wishing the script dug a little deeper into its characters, instead of playing things quite so safe. It feels like there was potential here for something more memorable than what we ended up getting. Overall, it's a perfectly watchable movie with good performances and enough emotional moments to keep it engaging. It just never quite reaches the level where I'd call it great.
I am very disappointed!
This was a pretty disappointing watch for me. The concept of a killer hippo movie actually sounds like it should be a lot of fun. Hippos are already some of the most dangerous animals on the planet, so there was definitely potential here to make something tense, entertaining, and maybe even a little ridiculous in a good way. Instead, the movie ends up feeling surprisingly dull. The characters are incredibly generic, and most of them are so underdeveloped that I struggled to care whether they survived or not. The story follows pretty much every creature feature cliché you can think of, and there are very few surprises along the way. The hippo itself has a few decent moments, and there are one or two attack scenes that are entertaining enough, but they're separated by long stretches of dialogue and filler that slow everything down. By the time the movie finally starts picking up momentum, it's already too late. I wouldn't call it terrible, because there are a couple of scenes that reminded me why I was interested in the movie in the first place. The problem is, those moments are few and far between. Overall, Hungry feels like a movie that had a fun idea, but never really figured out how to make the most of it.
Failure! Failure! You're still a failure! Failure! I can smell the failure!
To say I'm underwhelmed might be an understatement. The movie had all the right things to be a good movie. The setups were there. It had everything going for it, supposedly being based on the Woman of Tomorrow comic. I can tell you now, if you're expecting it to be like the comic, you might want to change what you think the movie is going to be like, because it takes a lot of liberties with that storyline. Let's first talk about what I actually enjoyed. Obviously, Jason Momoa as Lobo is one of the best things here, even though he doesn't show up for long. It's always exciting when he's on screen, and he captures the chaotic energy of Lobo very well. Some of the action sequences were well done. Millie is fine as Kara, but I do think she might have been miscast in this role. But the movie as a whole just feels forgettable. Like I just watched it, and I can barely tell you much about the villain, except he sucked, and might be the worst villain in a superhero movie since that chick in the Marvels with the hammer. I think the relationship she builds up with Ruthie throughout the movie has a pretty weak build-up and payoff, honestly. Even though I'm underwhelmed by this, I'm still excited to see what's next for the DC universe, and hopefully, Man of Tomorrow delivers.
Thank you, boys. Thank you.
I had a pretty good time with this one. At this point, you already know exactly what you're getting from a Jackass movie. Nobody is showing up expecting some deep story or groundbreaking filmmaking. You're here to watch a bunch of grown men make terrible decisions. And somehow, that's still entertaining all these years later. What surprised me is how much the movie leans into the history of the franchise. There are plenty of laughs and ridiculous moments, but there's also this underlying feeling that you're watching the end of an era. These guys have been doing this for so long that it's hard not to feel a little nostalgic seeing them all together again. Not every stunt lands, and there are definitely a few segments that aren't nearly as funny as the others. That's pretty much been the case with every Jackass project, though. For every stunt that has you crying with laughter, there's another one that just gets a chuckle and moves on. The thing that carries the movie is the chemistry between the cast. You can tell these guys have spent years together, and that friendship is a huge part of why the franchise has lasted as long as it has. Even when a joke doesn't work, the reactions usually do.
It's pretty cool, I guess.
This one was just okay for me. I wouldn't call it bad, but I also wouldn't say it's something I'm going to remember a few months from now. The movie has a decent premise, and there are a few moments where you can see the story it's trying to tell, but it never really goes much deeper than the surface level. The performances are solid enough, and the fashion world itself is probably the most interesting part of the movie. Some of the costumes, sets, and runway sequences are well done, and give the film a bit of personality. The problem is that once you get past all of that, the actual story is fairly predictable. A lot of the character arcs go exactly where you'd expect them to go, and there aren't many surprises along the way. The emotional moments don't hit quite as hard as they should, and some of the supporting characters feel like they're only there to move the plot forward. I never found myself bored, but I also never found myself fully invested either. It's one of those movies that's perfectly watchable while you're watching it, but once the credits roll, there's not much that sticks with you. You know what? I'm not one to never admit when I'm wrong, and I wasn't excited for this at all. And I can most definitely say this is an amazingly well done movie. I might have even shed a tear or two. The toys and Bonnie are back, but the toys soon realize they have a problem. When Bonnie gets a new lily pad, basically an iPad really, and they start feeling threatened because Bonnie spends all her time on this device. Jessie, who is the main character in this movie, decides to call Woody for help. Woody returns, and now they try and find a way to get Bonnie away from this new addictive technology. The movie really shocked me in how great the story was. It wasn't as one-dimensional as tech is bad, toys are good. It explores how we as a society have integrated tech into our daily lives and how we use it to even bond socially. In that aspect, you see why it is kind of necessary for Bonnie, otherwise she will feel left out in her friend group. Yeah, I think this movie is relevant in today's day and age, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe for more.